All right. Is the audio working all right? Okay. All right. So we're officially live. So hey everyone, welcome to the second workshop of the day, and we have something really exciting lined up. Today we're going to be having a session on quick tips for beginner UIs, or better UIs for people who are new to design. This is a very interesting topic. It's something I really relate to because our entire motto for SacHacks is design, code, and launch. Any project that you work on, it's not always just coding. You're gonna have to design. And I learned this like in a really nice way because that was my first experience into digital design. And ever since, it's just been an uphill progress, right? I'm constantly improving on design. I'm learning a lot of new things, even the tiniest things about, oh, trying to fix a button or like making it look appealing for a user, which is a better layout for a user. All that stuff is really appealing. So a lot of things to learn, especially working on these hackathon projects. I think it's a very useful workshop. So yeah, hopefully today you get some quick tips from our really experienced speaker today, who's Bryce Howitson. It's really nice to have you. So thank you so much for doing this workshop. He's a Google developer expert and a UX engineer. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, Bryce.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and let you share your screen, and over to you.
All right. Well, this is a great screen to start with. So full disclosure, I went to art school. I don't tell a lot of people that, but we're at a hackathon, so it seems a little weird that I'm going to put up an artist slide. There's a asterisk at the end of that though, and there's something. I don't know, when I think artist, I think of people like Jackson Pollock. Granted, that's a pretty cool painting, but it's not me. That's not what I do. I always kind of think, well, I got both my ears. Does that really make me an artist? There's all this precedent. I think of myself when I think of the term artist, this is the one I always end up with. I feel so much more like, Deadpool as the artist, and not any of these famous artists. And part of the reason for that is that I have always kind of approached everything that I do from a more engineering perspective. So a little background on me, the reason this says untitled, my current title or current role at my job is as a UX engineer. As part of that, I write a lot of code. But going from an art background to sort of this engineering background meant that I spent a lot of time doing kind of the whole spectrum of making things. We all need interfaces. We all have to talk to computers in some way, shape, or form. As AI becomes more and more part of our day-to-day life, we are going to have to make more ways to talk to computers. And so everybody's in this boat. Unfortunately, we don't always have access to a design team, right? We may not have a dedicated designer. We may have a friend who is a designer who could come in and help. But in many cases, it's the people making the thing that actually have to allow users to interact with it. This has kind of been the case all across history, but as we're very much more talking to computers, this is a thing that that really kind of is going to resonate for all of us. There's kind of another piece of this though. I don't really like having designers, engineers, product. I don't like having those silos because I really do believe that what we think of as good design, especially good user experience, is everybody's job. So that's kind of why I'm here today, because I would like to help everybody be a little bit better at that. I know it's scary. Kind of the whole point is that we can all do this. It's been kind of held as a perfect thing, and we've tried to pretend that this is the realm of only designers, and that's just not the case. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk you through some ways that everybody, regardless of your title, can actually be a designer. So let's start with one of these really big existential questions. I went to art school, which was very much not design school. They're different. Art, in many cases, seems self-serving. It's I make it because I feel something inside of me. Whereas design is something more akin to engineering. And the cool thing about that is that as long as you know the rules, as long as we know what art is and what design is, we can actually feel better about doing design. So, what is design? Well, design is measurable, right? There's a goal and there's a reason. So it's not subjective. You shouldn't be worried about things, about terms such as like or dislike, because that's not what matters. It matters if you're solving the problem. It's also not self-serving. There's a goal in mind. There's a very specific purpose for what you want to do. And then finally, design is not random, right? We just looked at Jackson Pollock's splatter painting, for lack of a better word. It is not random. It is very considered, and we do things for a reason. When we talk about UI design, frequently that reason is so that the user can do a very specific task, or so you can get some kind of input from the user that you need in a format you need it. This is also a good reminder that because good design is not subjective, this is a great time to think about adding things like analytics into your UIs. That's not a typical artist conversation, but knowing if your UI is working the way you think it should will actually help you make a better UI down the road. Okay. Art versus design. It's more nuanced than that, obviously, but for our purposes today, we want to be designers. Now, to be a designer, we just said it has a goal and a purpose. Well, what does that mean? There's one kind of really big thing that you need to know to be a designer. And that is really what your goal is and how you measure it. In the case of most user interfaces, that goal is to allow the user to do something, to engage. And the way you do that is with a term that we throw around a lot. It's called empathy. I have heard empathy described as wearing another person's shoes, but I don't think that's really the case. I think empathy is going to a thrift store and finding somebody's running shoes that already have 5,000 miles on them and putting them on and running a marathon, right? Your feet are gonna feel very different when you do that. So empathy is kind of this idea that you know the user at more than a just overview level. All right, we talk a lot in the design industry. We talk a lot about things like personas. You may have bumped into marketing that talks about a persona. These are usually things like the person is 35 and they live in suburbia and they have 2 kids and they drive a car, and those things don't really help you when you're creating UI. Instead, the things in empathy that really can help you when you're creating UI is to start to learn about your users in this way. I've got 3 things to try to remember. So, what does the user need to do? I need to book a trip. I need to check my bank account balance. I need to, whatever, insert your product goal here. Second, oftentimes a user doesn't know something. I don't know how to complete this process. Well, there's probably a YouTube video for that. I don't know what hotel I should stay in. There are reviews to take care of that kind of thing. And finally, think about what your user is scared of. This is kind of the big one for me. Many times your user is scared of things that you probably don't have to deal with, but if you can deal with them, they're going to make everything you build for that user better. So in healthcare, for example, I might be scared that I'm going to make a mistake. Mistakes in healthcare could be deadly. In banking, if I make a mistake, I could lose my house, I could lose my car. If just in the process of doing my job, I make a mistake, I could end up losing my livelihood. I could get fired and have to go convince someone else that I'm not a screw up. Let's make it a little more broad, though. In social media, if I mess up, I'm scared of my reputation. I'm scared of what everybody will think of me. So kind of keep all of these things in mind as you're creating an interface. You don't have to solve them all, but at least kind of understand that somebody might be approaching your interface this way. Another great example is I need to find a restaurant to order food from. Well, the context there and the empathy there is I am probably very hangry when I'm ordering that food. So what can the UI do to make this easier for me? All right. I don't know that I don't know what I want to eat. I just want to eat. Think about these processes as you're building UI. All right. Baseline foundation. We're building UI. We know who we need to talk to. All of you are asking, okay, great. I've got that. How do I get started? Well, there's this thing in art school that really has stuck with me. This idea that good artists borrow and great artists steal. Now, I know you're all thinking we've been told not to steal. This is bad. We shouldn't do this. There's this guy named Andy Warhol. You may have seen this painting. He literally went to the cabinet in his kitchen and stole a brand that everybody knew, painted it several times on a canvas. This painting actually sold for $15 million in 1996. So in today's money, that's almost 30 million US dollars. That's not too bad for stealing something out of your kitchen cabinet. So the point here is that there are a lot of things around you where you can find inspiration or downright get help. So if we're talking about UI design, how about a design system? We have a whole bunch of these, right? We've got material design. This one happens to be Shopify's version called Polaris. But these are designed to actually give you all the pieces you need to build UI. Obviously, you'll have to customize them a little bit and you'll have to know what you're doing. But there's one thing that you have available. You can just kind of steal that straight up. How about colors and fonts? I bet your company or organization that you're associated with has a design system or brand guidelines. Go and take those things, right? Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Actually make them do what they're supposed to do. This next slide is more just to show you how many things like UI frameworks exist. This was 30 seconds of searching for logos. There are hundreds of thousands of these available. There's one available for whatever technology you're using. Take a look at it and see if you can use it. You may not want to use it just straight up, right? Like if you take Material UI from Google, your things start to look very Google product-y. So maybe you change some colors, maybe you do a few things like that. But kind of think about what you've got available to you. And my guess is that there's more than you realize. The second part about making a good UI is to not reinvent the wheel. So we have these things that we call them design patterns. Really what a design pattern is a best practice for how to do something. So the common well-known design pattern is we know how to log into a web app or an app on your phone or anything like that. It almost always comes with a username and a password. Try to use that pattern because that's what people expect and what they know, and they don't have to learn a new way to do things. You've all heard of things like we've got cards, sign up and onboarding are really kind of handled for us. Date pickers are handled for us. How do I make a purchase with a credit card? I mean, the fields that go into a credit card are really well defined for us. You don't actually have to remake any of those things. You can just kind of use them as they are. And the reason that I say that is because so often we try to do this thing where we reinvent the wheel. Unless you have a much, much, much better way of authenticating somebody into your application, use a username and password. Like that's what we know, and it's accepted. Best part is I could stop here. I gave you plenty of resources to kind of just be done and make a UI. But I can hear all of you, even though I can't. This is very much not what you were thinking. You were thinking, hey, I'm going to get some like real tips to, well, I want to level up my UI design, just like this. So let's do that. I've got a handful of tips that you can apply to every project. Part of them is just awareness. Part of them is kind of knowing the rule before you break it. But in general, this is relatively straightforward. Let's start with the easy one. Why is there a giant number 1 on the screen? Well, it's because I want all of you to remember that every single screen should have one job. Why do I say that? Well, users have a task they're trying to do. If you give them multiple tasks in one place, they suddenly don't know what it is they're trying to do or what you want them to do. How's this for an example? Yahoo search screen. Everything is there. There's news, there's weather, there's stories you might like. There's your horoscope. You can sign into your email. Okay, great, right? But now I'm not helping the user. I'm not guiding them. I'm not showing them what they should do. Let's take the one that we're all used to. Look at this obvious difference. There is basically one thing you're supposed to do on this screen. There are a bunch of secondary actions you can take, right? You can go to the Google store, you can do an image search, you can get to your email. But front and center, we have search. That's the one thing you're supposed to do here. There's no confusion about that. Google is helping you do the thing that they want you to do. Right. There's a bunch more on this kind of focus concept. So let's talk a little bit about how we handle layouts and things like that to help you understand the thing that you're supposed to do. For example, I frequently see images in say a landing page or splash screen or something like that, but sometimes even in a flow that remove your vision from the thing that you want. I'm guessing most of you looked off to the left side of the screen right there. That's not exactly helpful for you. So kind of keep in mind about all the things that you can do to target the person to get them to look where you want them to look. Let's contrast that with this one right here. It turns out that simply facing the chair into the text that we want guides your eye as the user so that you look where the designer wants you to look. Pay attention to this because this can, there's a lot of things that can impact this. Where a person's looking, right? If I look this way, all of you look with me. So have a person look at the content that you want them to pay attention to. Vehicles. We think of vehicles as moving forward, so move them toward the thing that you want people to look at. Arrows, flags, a camera lens. We think of ourselves as part of the camera. People running, all of those things use those things to move the viewer or the user into the concept that you need them to pay attention to. And that's really going to help them kind of move forward over time. All right. In addition to that, most of us would say that this is not a comfortable environment to be in. Can I handle it for a little while? Sure. But there's just too much going on. I live in the upper Midwest. Obviously, we have a much bigger personal bubble than people that live in New York. But there's this idea that humans need space for things. And I'd really like you to remember that when you're talking about a UI design as well. Think of the elements in your UI as humans. This isn't horrible, right? I've got a bunch of cards. I got some profile pictures. I've got names of people, things like that. But look at the difference between this one and this one. I'm simply adding space. I'm making it more comfortable for you to read the text and understand what I'm looking at. So just a quick step back there. It's all the same information. We just added space. We added space around the tiles. We added space inside of the tiles. We even added space between the lines of text. Typically, for people that are just starting to design UIs, it always feels like you've got things crushed down too much. Add padding, add margins, add things like that you think is good, and then double it. And you can more easily move forward that way. Okay. In addition to giving things enough space, it really matters the order that you put them in. Back to having one primary task per screen of a UI. Let's think about how the layers of information help you to understand what that is. So here's a profile of me. There's nothing wrong with this, but there's no hierarchy other than, say, starting at the top, we've got my name, and starting and ending at the bottom, we've got contact info. Instead, though, what if I did this? Notice how my name is now much larger. My title is bolded. Doesn't have to be bigger, but it's obviously darker and therefore more important. We gave the action that you should do, in this case, like follow this profile. We made it a real button-looking thing, so it's obvious what it is. It has hierarchy, right? Here's the catch, though. Once you go down this route of hierarchy, it's really easy to start forgetting that things all need to be the same. Consistency is a really big deal for UI design. And the reason it's a really big deal is that you want people to actually learn how to do a task once and then understand what that is. That task could be as simple as clicking on a button. You use consistency in the same color, the same size font, the same positioning on the screen, so that I know this is a clickable thing. I usually say pick a set of colors, pick a set of font sizes and weights, and then try to use those and margins and everything the same everywhere you go. Side note, words also matter. So try to be consistent. Tell the person next, 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 finish, so that they know exactly what's going on. But try to keep them, don't try to use different words for the same thing across multiple screens. From a very tactical standpoint, this is a great way to create consistency. I almost always recommend that people use base 8 for units. So in this case, we've got, say, 12, 16, 24. Those are all multiples of 8. If you steal this from this presentation, I think that's great. This system will in most cases help you a lot. Notice also that those units are used for both the font size as well as margins and padding for items. Okay. Next tip, use those spacing and consistency for alignment. Think about how things are ordered and where they're positioned. Hierarchy, we're used to things like indents because we think of lists. A list will move something in and give it space below a header item. Notice we're doing kind of the same thing here. But remember to keep the consistency and to keep the sizing as well. I know this looks like it's for the wrong talk. It's not. But as part of a technical audience, it's always fun to say, in your UIs, try to avoid containers. It's very typical that I see things like this in UI design. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just there's a lot of boxes and shadows. What it does is it means that your eye doesn't really know where to go and what's important. What if instead we take away a lot of those boxes? This one is leaving, we're using some color. There's still containers around things, but they're much more spread out. We don't need a container on every row, for example, because having the delete button to the far right side of those file names, that actually causes your eye to consider it a container. So basically what we're doing is we're saying, we can keep some containers. Things like the new post and title is important. So let's give that a container as part of hierarchy. Text boxes, inputs, things like that often need a container because that's how we understand what they are and how we identify them. So don't worry about getting rid of that. You can kind of keep those, but think about things like buttons, for example. Notice how we have the save and publish is the action I want you to take. It has a dark orange background around it. The cancel button is something I probably don't want you to do as much. So we took the container away from it. We didn't make it look as much like a button. Therefore, people don't tend to do those things first. This one's fun. I assume that as a person working on UI design, often this is one of the things that that frightens you or terrifies you about picking things. The first question that we ask is to serif or not to serif. Now, a serif is the little item, the little decoration on an item. It's at the bottom of the eye, where it spreads out and it's got a horizontal line, and the little edge coming off the top of the lowercase I. It's the bottom of the Q. It's the base of the N. All those things, serif literally means decorated in Latin. Typically, if you're going to show type really large, it's okay to use serifs. Body copy, things like that, avoid the serif. Also, this isn't as big a deal anymore because our screen density and pixel density has gotten so good, but it's typically a pretty good idea to avoid serifs in digital interfaces because the serifs themselves get muddy and may not display the way you think they should. The next thing is that we talk about type stacks or fontography, making type that goes together. Here's a picture. So hope you all remember that. Typography is like peanut butter and jelly. You really want, if you're going to use multiple typefaces, you want ones that mix and match very well. There are a bunch of places that will give you good font pairings. This is one that's taking all Google fonts and pairing them together. You notice that some of those are serifed header with sans serif text, or just a large block sans with, serifed headers with sans serif text, and then some of them are just sans serifs together. I actually think that until you get really good with typography, you can probably get away with one font. Use that one font in different weights to create hierarchy, and you don't have to worry about pairing them together. If you're wondering which ones to start with a good sans serif. Your computer probably comes with Arial or Helvetica, or Roboto is an easy one to get. All of those are good, solid sans serif fonts that have a lot you can do with them. And the reason I'm recommending one, and I'm recommending what most of us probably think of as a boring font, is that there's these other types of fonts that exist. And we've all seen them. Comic Sans, Papyrus obviously fit into that. But in this example, this is kind of like a sort of a wood type. We might think of it as maybe a Western-ish font. These have a lot of meaning. You need to know exactly what it is you're trying to say and exactly why you're trying to say it to use this in UI design. T-shirt is completely different, and I'm going to leave that one up to you. But if you're talking about something that somebody has to use, like an interface, let's stick with some very tried and true and well-known fonts and have a very good reason to go with something like an expressive font. All right. When we're talking about typography, the whole space conversation actually works here too. Notice that I'm actually giving these lines of text on the right extra space. Space between the letters, and in the case of the body copy, space between the lines. It's not a lot. I mean, we're talking 4%, 1%. We're talking about 1.4 lines versus 1 line for the line spacing. Doing this makes things a lot easier to read. Kind of the rule of thumb here is that you don't need a lot, but if you're using all caps, you should use more spacing. And the larger the text, the less spacing you need. So pretty straightforward, but you can actually see the difference there. One of those things that very few people are going to call you out on it, but they're going to look at the text on the right and think it's easier to read than the text on the left. Along those same lines, think about how much text you're putting on the screen. We typically recommend that a chunk of body copy is between 40 and 60 characters long. So you can kind of see the section there. This is how much space you should have. Not necessarily space on your screen, but it's really hard to read past that. So the one with 70, depending on your monitor size or screen size, you're going to watch a user do this. That's not really something you want to have happen when somebody's reading, because it slows them down and makes it harder. All right, typography, that's a lot of stuff, but hopefully some easy tricks you can use. The next one that we always have to talk about is color. Now, I know this is being recorded, so I probably shouldn't admit this, but after going to art school and calling myself a designer, probably one of my least favorite tasks in the design process is picking a color. But that's okay. Remember what we talked about early on? Good artists borrow, great artists steal. Well, now you know why the colors in the interface on the slide deck are what they are, right? I found all of these colors in Andy Warhol's Campbell's soup cans. Turns out they go together pretty well. So let's use those. Maybe you have a color palette or a branding guide or something like that that's giving you colors. You're trying to figure out how to use them. The rule of thumb that you should pretty much always follow is 70-25-5. Now, that means that 70% of your interface is a kind of a base default color. It's probably the color of your text. It's maybe the background color, but it's pretty, like you can use a value range of these colors, so lighter and darker, but you should use that as your primary. 25% is okay to have as an accent color, and that accent color is something that catches your eye, directs you where to go. And then 5%, again, you've noticed in my case that 5% is what we call an action color. The action color is the thing that makes that something is interactable. This is the thing that you want the users to learn that they can tap, click, interact with in some way, so that they don't have to keep learning again and again and again. Just always use the same colors for that. Notice, for example, that notice the yellow in that center image. That's mostly an action color, not always, but they've used it for things like progress bars. Far left, we have two action colors. It's kind of that light pink and the light green, but it's pretty obvious that these are all things you can interact with. All right. When it comes to colors and text, keep in mind that really bright white on a really black background is really hard to read. It's the same thing with really black text on a really white background. These are probably, even side by side, almost indistinguishable. But in almost every case, the not using full black, whether it's a background or for text color, and not using full white, whether it's for a background or text color, makes things a little easier to read and a little easier to see. This is another one of those where people won't know why it matters, but they'll feel better about one version and not the other. While we're talking about text, there is one thing to keep in mind, and this is kind of a big one, and that is that depending on the society that your audience is in, colors will have meaning, right? In Western culture, green does not mean stop, right? That's messing with everybody who looks at this. Red does not typically mean go. So keep those in mind. I know I showed you a bunch of red buttons. Those are not like they're not in a good bad scenario, right? There's not meaning implied. If you're showing somebody that the ratings for this are good, probably don't use red. And if you're showing them that the ratings are bad, don't use green. If that kind of just kind of remember that, and then remember also that other cultures think of these colors in different ways. Asian cultures think of some of the colors that Western cultures think of as bad as good. And there's a little dichotomy there, but know your audience, know what they think of the colors. Finally, I hear all of you saying, okay, great, but where do I get things like colors? Where do I get pictures? Where do I get all the stuff that I might want to combine together and use it? Well, turns out we have AI now. And there's a lot of, if you listen to the industry, there's a lot of kind of angst around AI art. Can AI generate art? Can it be considered designed if the AI does it? I don't think we need to worry about that too much, though I would point out that the bar for what is art in our culture is pretty low. Coco the gorilla, I'm not knocking Coco at all. In fact, it's pretty impressive that a gorilla is painting art. But I think that this just proves that we don't really need to fight about whether AI is capable of making art and design. We just need to know how to use it and where to use it. So one of those places to use it, remember I said I hate picking colors. The Chroma project will ask you what colors you like and then help you pick colors based on that. Super useful. I probably would not have thought of a kind of pinkish orange on top of a mint green, but it looks pretty good there. How about things like, well, don't spend time cutting out backgrounds. We have AI tools that can do a very, very good job. Figured if I was going to, remove a background, I might as well do it with style. So we got a DeLorean. If I want actual images that I can use somewhere, these are all images I created using Adobe Firefly, Midjourney, Dolly. There's a lot of options at this point. In fact, there's even options to take an image that we have, and you can ask, there are AI tools out there that will tell you what prompts to use to get Midjourney or Dolly to replicate an image similar to that. So if you're feeling stuck, but you found an image you like, think about that route. The other route is obviously there are plenty of illustrators in the world that would love to work with you and could use your support. There's plenty of photographers. There are places to get images, but if you have something very specific in mind and it's hard to get, think about what AI can do for you at that point as well. All right. I haven't seen a lot of questions in the comments, but certainly if we have some, feel free to start dropping those in. In the meantime, if you'd like to get a hold of me, you can do that this way. I've put together a few of the resources for things that I talked about at that link on the bottom. Don't feel like you have to use any of those, but I'll keep trying to collect a few of them and make it easier for you to find resources and tools and things like that.
All right. Thank you so much for that. It was definitely very insightful. We didn't have any questions in the chat, but I did have like a few personal questions for myself. So just kind of wanted to know your opinions on them.
Sure, shoot.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest one is a lot of the projects that I ended up working on, it's either working on a new product or a new feature. And I really needed to know, if we're trying to get a right balance between user familiarity and expressing my creativity. I know a lot of the design languages, especially in websites, have changed quite a lot over the years. You might see a lot of bold decisions being made in like pretty big companies. But yeah, how do you strike that balance, like going forward with like a well-known layout versus exploring your creativity?
So This is a really hard question, but when you say things like a product or a feature specifically, um, there are very few wholly new features in the world, right? There are a lot of pieces of things. I would do everything in your power to copy what the users are used to. Unless, like, I go back to my login conversation all the time. I see wireframes all the time where people are like, look, it's a login. Like, I know what a login is. I know how to do that. If you have some great idea on how to do it differently, by all means, explore that. But most of the time, that feature that you have, it exists somewhere, whether it's in your organization, whether it's in your industry or not. Like it's somewhere and there's a pattern for it. So try to give the user what they're expecting. When it comes to broader layout of things, again, I usually suggest that you default to a pattern library or UI library or your guidelines, your design system, whatever those things are that you have access to. And the reason that I say that is for consistency, but also because it's a lot when you start saying, well, I want to be creative with this. There's nothing wrong with that. But it starts to get a lot harder to say, did it work? Like it's a lot less objective at that point. So if you can give me a really good reason for why the known way of doing things doesn't work, and that good reason could be this doesn't set us apart from our competition, right? Okay, fine. You just have to give me that reason. You have to be able to say the known way of doing this doesn't work because of whatever, instead of I just want to be creative. There's nothing wrong with that. Coco the gorilla wants to be creative. But that puts things firmly into that art category that is much harder to rationalize and understand and test than the design category, if you will.
Yeah, that perfectly answers the question. Thank you for that. I think just like one follow-up is I'm curious to know how exactly you go about like, making design decisions. Because at least with a few experiences I've had, I would spend way too much time on like a very small thing until I feel like it's good, and I'll never feel convinced. So I'm just curious to see how exactly you go about making decisions.
That is a fantastic question and a really hard one for everyone. A long time ago, I was reminded that perfect is the enemy of good. We often go past something that is quite good in hopes of making it perfect, and in so doing, we A, never get done with it, and B, it's just not as good as it probably was 5 steps back. So I do try to remember that. One of the tricks is giving yourself a deadline. Be as creative as you want, but at a certain time, be done. I think you will find that it focuses you a lot. But also, this is why that criteria is so expensive or so just important. It's expensive if you don't have a goal. It's expensive in your time. It's expensive in your creativity. It's expensive in just your sanity. If you have a goal in mind, you can test the thing that you've made against it, and you can see when it's pretty good or when it's done. If you don't have that goal in mind, or if you don't know exactly what you need it to do, you can't do that. And I think that we sometimes get hung up on it being a really big goal. Can I get the user to click on this button? Because that's the most important part of this UI. It's not a huge goal. You can test it. It doesn't have to be, solving world hunger or something like that as your goal. But I think we get wrapped up in these really big goals frequently, and we forget that little goals actually move the ball and get things done. So that's one of them. The other one is knowing your users. I cannot emphasize how important it is to know what the people are trying to do with it and why. And those things. There have been an awful lot of times where I've actually watched someone do something with a thing and said, oh, I had a completely different understanding of that. And my amazing design that I didn't want to bend on at all doesn't even remotely help them. So find ways to learn those things, because all of us, I'm not including myself in this, the absolute best designers in the world, Steve Jobs, people like that, they didn't always get it right. So if you're unwilling to learn from the people that will actually interact with this and do things with it, you can't get it right either.
Right. Yeah. It kind of reminded me of another question that I had in mind for a while, is especially with design, I feel like over time, like user experience has evolved, right? And so has user behavior. A few years back, if you'd say a landing page was shown to a bunch of people, I don't think they would interact the same way as they would right now. So keeping that in mind, do you still stick with trying to make it user-centric according to now, or like have the hopes that eventually it's going to be the new norm?
I think we're back to what's your reason. Uber's a pretty successful company. I submit to you that they are not successful because of their app. I also don't think they're successful specifically because they've managed the logistics of cars and rides. I think one of the reasons that Uber is super successful is because they've made it okay to get into a stranger's car. Right? Growing up, you're not supposed to do that. Mom and dad said, don't get into somebody else's, like, this is bad, right? Uber made that okay. So I think this is back to this whole, like, what is the goal? What does the user say? What do you need to have happen? Because there are plenty of places where you shouldn't do the thing. Back to my password thing, if you could come up with a better way to authenticate into things, like Google is trying, there's a bunch of different people working on that problem. Usernames and passwords are horrible. If you can come up with a better way to do it, by all means do that. But I think in most cases, that's not the overarching goal of the thing you're making. So try to match the patterns that get put on your business analyst hat, not your designer hat, not your engineer hat. Try to use the patterns that get people to do the thing that you want them to do at the end. If you have to invent a way to do that, go for it. If you need somebody to do it without thinking, you kind of have to use the way that they're used to doing it.
Yeah.
So there's no one size fits all.
Right.
And I really, really don't want the takeaway from this to be, don't be creative, just always do what everybody else is doing. That's not it at all. It's more that you have a lot of resources. Use them to make your life better and know when not to use them.
Right. Yeah, that's well said. Thanks for that. Before we end it off, I guess one final question is, according to you, what do you think was your biggest challenge and what was your biggest takeaway from it?
Biggest challenge in regards to
any form of design?
My biggest challenge is actually always getting the user to tell me what they really think or mean. My biggest takeaway from that is that you can't trust people. I know, that sounds weird. You very much can trust people, right? Watch them, see what they do. Just don't necessarily trust what they tell you. So if you're watching someone interact with an interface, for example, and they can't find the button that you thought was super, or that it is super important and that you need them to click to do the next thing, you can ask them if they notice that button, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, I did, right? They're not going to tell you anything useful. So observe what's going on, ask the user context questions, like how they're feeling, what's going on, things like that. But then start to build in, I made an analytics comment at the very beginning, build in analytics so that you can actually learn things about your users that they won't tell you. So I made the mistake many times of being like, oh, well, I asked people what they wanted. They told me. It's that, maybe Henry Ford said, if I asked people what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse. It's very true. And the biggest challenge I've ever had is not just trusting what people tell me, but figuring out how to verify it and understand what the base problem actually is. I honestly think that anybody who can do that, aesthetics completely aside, you can build interfaces that are designed very, very well. I mean, look at Craigslist. That is probably the least aesthetic interface on the planet, and yet it works very, very well for what it does. So yeah, that's both challenge and aha moment kind of wrapped all in one. But.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, it's definitely hard to get exactly what they're feeling when they're like doing a test or like doing a user interview. People tend to kind of give template answers, or they don't really express
people
it.
Tell you what they think that you want to hear.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, people ask like, would you use this? Well, of course I would, because I'm standing here talking to you.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily borne out in reality, though. Right? Like they don't. Most of those people that say yes, of course I would use this, don't.
Right.
Probably 1 in 10, 1 in 20, something like that would actually go forward and continue using it. So it's kind of knowing what you're getting into and how to suss out the actual information is the big deal part there.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you so much. I really hope that this entire workshop was really useful for our hackers, especially now that they're just starting out on their project. I'm sure they're going to take in all the tips that you gave them. So yeah, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll have you here again some other time.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's true.